She asked me a simple question: why do you not have a girlfriend? But what she didn't know was that her question would unravel a heart buried in years of pain, fear, and lost love. What happens next changed everything. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll see why love isn't just about finding someone. It's about having the courage to open your heart again, even when it's terrifying. Thank you for listening to this heartfelt story. If it moved you, share it, comments below, and let someone know. You are never alone. I remember the morning sun spilling over the ridge, casting gold across the barn where I leaned against the weathered wood, hands rough from chores. She appeared there, barefoot in the grass, hair catching the light like spun honey. Her eyes held questions, unguarded, daring. "Why do you not have a girlfriend?" she asked, voice soft, teasing, yet edged with something I could not name. I laughed, low, and shook my head, pretending. "Life is busy. Work, the boy, the farm. Not much time for anything else." The truth sat heavy, buried behind years of regret and caution. She was the reason I hesitated, the reason I shielded my heart. I noticed the way she tilted her head, how the sunlight danced on her smile. And it struck me sharply. How could someone so kind, so alive, stand here and ask about love, when I had already lost the courage to embrace it? The smell of hay and earth filled my lungs. Her presence made the world sharper, louder, more fragile. I wanted to tell her that the question cut deeper than she knew, that my heart had room, but it feared the ache of opening it and finding emptiness. Her hand brushed mine as she reached for a stray strand of hair. I froze. The warmth lingered longer than I expected. She laughed again, light and honest, and I realized that this was the first time in years. I wanted something more than routine, more than duty, more than safety. I could not admit that she had always been the reason I kept my heart fenced. I watched her walk toward the creek, and every step she took stirred a longing I thought I had buried forever. The wind shifted, the scent of wildflowers and river drifted to me. I wanted to call her back, to tell her everything, but the words lodged in my throat. I only watched. The creek whispered over stones, its voice soft, intimate, like a secret meant only for her. I followed at a distance, careful, my heart hammering against ribs that had grown too accustomed to silence. She knelt at the water's edge, hands skimming the surface, watching ripples stretch and vanish. The sunlight caught in her hair, turning it into a halo I felt unworthy to approach. I wanted to speak, to tell her that every laugh, every careless glance, had been lodging in my chest, long before she asked that question. But my voice stayed buried, as if fear had built a wall higher than the barn ridge. She looked up suddenly, and her eyes found mine across the stretch of grass and stone. Her smile faltered just a fraction, and something inside me ached, the raw, sharp pain of wanting and not daring. I remembered nights awake by the fire, my son asleep in the next room, wondering if I would ever let someone in again. And there she was, breathing in the wild air, brave, unknowing, touching a wound I thought I had sealed forever. I stepped closer, the soft crunch of grass underfoot betraying my presence. Her gaze held mine, steady and unjudging. "You think too much," she said quietly, almost a whisper, and yet it carried farther than the wind across the fields. The words sank in, an understanding I could not speak, a truth that trembled on the edge of confession. I wanted to tell her that I had built walls, not to keep the world out, but to keep her safe from the mistakes of a man who loved too hard once and lost. But I stayed silent. Her hand reached out again, and I felt the pull, stronger than reason, deeper than fear. I took a step closer. Her hand hovered, trembling slightly, and I felt a heat rise in my chest, a warmth I had not allowed myself to feel in years. The breeze carried the scent of pine and river mud, and it wrapped around us like a quiet blessing. "You do not have to be afraid," she said softly, and her voice struck something fragile inside me, something I thought was long dead. I swallowed hard. The truth wanted to escape, to spill in words that would shatter the careful walls I had built. I wanted to tell her I had loved before, and lost in a way that nearly broke me. I wanted to tell her that she was the reason I never tried again, that she had quietly lived in the shadow of my heart, before she even knew my name. But the words caught, stuck in the throat of a man who feared being too much and not enough all at once. She knelt closer to the water, her reflection shimmering in the ripples, and for a moment I saw not just her face, but all the hope I had tried to bury. "I just do not understand," she whispered, "why someone like you would stay alone." I wanted to tell her that the answer was her, that the reason I remained cautious, distant, careful, was because letting her in felt like stepping into the sun after years in shadow. I wanted to confess that my heart had always known her, even when my mind told me it could not survive loving again. The creek murmured between us, tiny waves catching sunlight, and I realized that silence could no longer hold me. Her eyes searched mine, innocent, patient, expecting. I wanted to take her hand, to feel that simple, honest connection. But something inside hesitated, the fear of my own unspoken truth rooting me to the spot. She smiled faintly, a gentle tug at the edges of my guarded heart, and I felt the pull of a life I had nearly forgotten existed. A life with love, with laughter, with someone who could share the ache and the joy alike. I stepped closer. Her hand hovered again, just above mine, and the sunlight danced on the creek, splitting into little fragments of gold that seemed to tremble like my heart. I wanted to close the space between us, to bridge the years of caution and sorrow that I had carried alone. But every step forward carried the weight of old mistakes, and the fear of dragging her into the shadow I had built. She tilted her head, studying me with a patience I did not deserve. "You always look like you are carrying the world," she said softly. Her voice was steady, calm, yet it pierced deeper than any knife. I swallowed, tasting the metallic tang of longing, the ache of wanting to confess a truth I had buried too long, that I had loved once, lost once, and somehow survived, but only in half measures. Never fully alive, never fully open, until now. The wind stirred the tall grass around us, and the sound was like a chorus of whispers, carrying stories of those who had loved and feared and lost. I felt my son's laughter echo in the distance, reminding me of the joy I still could feel, and the courage that love sometimes demands. Her hand brushed against mine, light as a feather, and a shiver ran through me. It was more than touch, it was recognition, a wordless promise that the world could still be tender. I wanted to tell her that she had always been the reason. I had never let anyone close, that every attempt at moving on had failed because a part of me had been waiting for her. But my lips would not form the words. Instead, I took a tentative step closer, and felt the warmth of her presence surround me. Soft, unjudging, forgiving. She glanced at me, eyes wide, and I realized that this moment was a threshold. One step, one word, could change everything. The creek rippled again, its song like a heartbeat, steady and insistent, and I stood there trembling, knowing that I could not stay silent forever. I reached for her hand. Our hands met at last, and the warmth of hers seeped into mine, steadying me in a way I had not expected. The creek babbled beside us, its gentle song mingling with the quiet thrum of my heartbeat. For a moment, the world shrank to just us, to the soft brush of skin, the light in her eyes, the scent of wildflowers clinging to her hair. She smiled, tentative, and the corners of her mouth lifted like sunlight over the ridge. "You are heavier than you let on," she whispered, and I laughed, low, though it was not entirely joy. More a sound of release, of recognition, of longing finally aloud. I wanted to tell her everything. About the nights I had stayed awake, wondering if love would ever visit me again. About the son I had raised with my hands and heart. About the empty space I had kept fenced, waiting without knowing for someone like her. But words faltered. They could not capture the ache, the hope, the fear, all tangled inside me like the creek's winding currents. She shifted closer, her fingers brushing mine again, this time deliberate, and I felt the fragile barrier around my heart tremble. The air smelled of pine and earth, the distant mountains hazy in the golden light of afternoon. Every sensation pulled me toward a truth I had hidden too long from myself, that to love again meant risking everything. And yet, in that risk, finding life. Her eyes searched mine, patient and knowing, and I saw in them the courage I had denied myself. A courage that whispered I could let her in, that I could let go of fear long enough to feel. I wanted to tell her that she was the reason I stayed cautious, the reason my heart had never strayed. But I only held her hand tighter, letting the silence speak instead, letting the pull between us say what my lips could not. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the creek, and I realized that time had slowed, every second stretching like eternity, every heartbeat tethered to hers. She leaned slightly closer. Her breath brushed my cheek, and I felt the fragile walls around my heart start to crumble. The creek's song filled the silence, its gentle rhythm echoing the pulse in my veins. I could feel every nerve alive, attuned to her presence, to the faint tremor of her fingers in mine. "I have waited too long," she whispered, and her words hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. I wanted to tell her I had too, that I had been waiting for someone with eyes like hers, someone who could see past the rough edges of a broken man. But the words lodged in my throat. Fear and desire tangled together so tightly, I could not separate them. Instead, I let my hand move slowly, tracing the curve of her palm, feeling the warmth and softness I had almost forgotten existed. She did not pull away. She only let herself be held, her gaze steady, inviting, gentle. The wind stirred, brushing through the trees, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine needles. I realized then that every cautious step I had taken in life had led to this moment, to the quiet ache of longing finally meeting its answer. Her eyes glimmered with unspoken understanding, and I could see the kindness in her heart, the patience, the quiet courage to love someone who had learned to live with shadows. I wanted to confess the truth, that she had been the reason I never tried, that I had built walls not to keep the world out, but to keep her safe from a man who still carried loss. But I stayed silent, letting the moment speak for me. The sun dipped further, and long shadows stretched across the creek. Her hand tightened slightly in mine, and I felt a pull deeper than desire, stronger than fear, binding me to her in ways I could not resist. My lips hovered near her ear, wanting to whisper the truth, to tell her everything I had never dared say. But a part of me still trembled, uncertain if love could survive the weight of years and pain. She tilted her head, and our breaths mingled in the cooling air. Her eyes held a question, patient, unwavering, and I knew that to answer it fully would change everything. I took a slow step closer, letting my hand brush the side of her face, and felt a tremor of anticipation, a fear so sweet it was almost unbearable. The creek shimmered in the fading light, and I realized that the world outside this moment had ceased to exist. I leaned in further, ready to cross the invisible line that had kept my heart tethered. But the words still lingered unspoken, hanging between us like fragile glass waiting to shatter. Our breaths mingled in the cooling air, and I felt the weight of years pressing against my chest. Each memory, each mistake, each moment of loss, flaring alive in the presence of her. Her hand cupped mine, and the warmth of her touch seemed to melt the cold caution I had carried like armor for so long. "I have never seen anyone like you," she whispered, and the words landed softly, yet they shook me. More than any storm I had endured on the frontier. I wanted to tell her she was the same, that her laughter, her quiet courage, her gaze, had haunted me longer than I dared admit. But the words lodged, tangled with fear and hope. The wind stirred the creek again, its murmurs weaving through the tall grass, and I felt the world narrow to her, to me, to the fragile thread of connection that trembled between us, alive and demanding. I wanted to tell her that she had been the reason I never let anyone close, that every careful step I took, every night I stayed awake, was in secret devotion to her, before I even knew her name. Instead, I leaned closer, the tip of my nose brushing hers, and felt her inhale, soft, steady, trusting. Her eyelashes caught the light, and I thought of all the mornings I had imagined this moment, the warmth of someone unafraid of the scars I carried. I wanted to confess that I had loved before, that I had lost, and that loss had made me wary. But seeing her here, seeing her hand in mine, I realized that perhaps love was worth the ache. Her lips parted slightly, and I sensed the hesitation mirrored in her eyes. The same fear, the same yearning, as if our hearts had both been waiting for permission to leap. I wanted to speak, to tell her everything, but the air itself seemed to hold its breath, as though the world knew the fragility of this instant. I felt the pull stronger, a magnetic force drawing me into the warmth of her presence, and my heart thundered with longing I could no longer deny. Our faces drew closer, and I could feel every heartbeat, every breath, every unspoken word, shaping the space between us. The golden light of dusk washed over us, and I realized that stepping forward would mean surrendering all the careful walls I had built, all the protection I had wrapped around my soul. I hesitated only for a fraction, and then, instinctively, I brushed my lips to hers, tentative, reverent, a question and an answer, spoken without words. Her fingers tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, and I felt something shift deep inside me, something I had thought long dead. The creek's song swelled, as if urging us onward, and the shadows of the evening wrapped around us, soft, protective, endless. I wanted to tell her that she was the reason I had kept my heart closed all these years, but even now, the words remained unspoken, suspended in the space between kisses, between heartbeats, between the past I had carried, and the future trembling before us. Her lips pressed against mine, soft, warm, yet questioning, and I felt a tremor run through me, a shaking I had not known since the loss I had carried for so long. The air smelled of creek water and pine, of sun-baked earth, and every sense was sharpened, alert to the gentle brush of her hands, the heat radiating from her, the steady rhythm of her pulse beneath my fingertips. I wanted to tell her that I had always waited for someone like her, someone brave enough to see the walls I had built, someone tender enough to reach past the scars. But my voice faltered, and instead, I let my forehead rest lightly against hers, letting the silence speak the words I could not. She laughed softly, a sound like wind through leaves, and I realized that laughter was a balm I had not allowed myself in years. Her eyes, bright and fearless, searched mine for an answer, for a confession of everything I had never dared to say. I could feel her heartbeat, rapid, insistent, like mine, and I realized that love was not gentle or quiet. It demanded reckoning. It demanded courage. It demanded that I step into the sunlight, with all my shadows exposed. Her fingers traced the line of my jaw, and I felt the weight of the past pressing against me. Memories of nights alone, of choices made, of pain endured. And yet, here she was, her warmth breaking through the armor I had worn so long. "I do not understand how you stayed alone for so long," she whispered, and it struck me with a clarity I had not expected. I had not been alone, not truly. I had been waiting for her. The wind stirred the creek, sending ripples across the water's surface, and I saw our reflections merge. Two halves of a life suddenly aligned, and the ache I had carried for years twisted into hope, fragile but undeniable. Her breath tickled my ear, her voice trembling with something unspoken, and I felt the pull of a truth I could no longer resist. I wanted to tell her she had always been the reason. I had never tried before, but even that confession seemed too small for the weight of what I felt. I leaned into her again, our foreheads touching, her hands in mine, and I realized that surrendering to this feeling was the only way to live fully again. The shadows deepened, and the creek whispered, and I felt the unspoken promise of a love that could heal, endure, and transform everything I had ever feared. I pressed my lips to hers once more, and the world narrowed to the heat of our bodies, the brush of skin, the quiet understanding that some hearts wait a lifetime to find each other. Her lips parted against mine, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. A fire I had buried under years of caution and sorrow. The wind stirred again, ruffling the strands of hair across her face, and the scent of pine and wet earth wrapped around us, mixing with the heat of our closeness. I wanted to tell her everything about the nights I had spent watching my son sleep, wondering if love would ever visit me again, about the hollow ache I carried after loss, about the fear that had kept my heart fenced for so long. But my voice remained trapped, and instead I let my hands wander softly along her arms, tracing the curve of her shoulders, memorizing the feel of her against me. Her laughter came again, soft and warm, a sound that made the tightness in my chest loosen, and I realized that even fear could be gentle when shared with someone who truly understood. "You are too quiet," she whispered, and her eyes held a mixture of amusement and something deeper, something that saw past all the guarded layers I wore. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, wanting to tell her that she had always been the reason. I stayed cautious, but the words faltered again. Instead, I rested my forehead against hers, feeling the tremor of her breath, matching the rhythm of my own heartbeat, and the creek beside us seemed to swell in agreement, its water singing a quiet hymn of patience and longing. I felt her fingers curl around mine, anchoring me, calling me forward, and I realized that love demanded surrender, even when the past begged me to remain behind. Her eyes searched mine, and I understood that she could see everything, the scars, the quiet fears, the hope I had tried to hide from myself. The golden light of evening stretched across the creek, painting her hair with fire and honey, and I felt the ache of wanting and needing, a longing that had been patient for too long. I leaned closer, feeling the press of her body, and she met me halfway, her lips brushing mine in a tentative promise. Fragile, trembling, yet fierce with truth, the shadows deepened around us, and I felt the pull of something unstoppable, something that had been waiting for this moment, longer than either of us realized. Her breath mingled with mine, warm, steady, insistent, and I wanted to tell her I had loved before, lost before, and feared letting anyone in again. But even now, the words remained unspoken, hanging between us like a fragile thread, waiting for courage, for surrender. For the moment, when silence could no longer contain the truth, I pressed my hands gently against her waist, and the pull between us grew stronger, a magnetic force that defied reason, that whispered of hearts willing to brave the past. for the chance of a future together. The creek song had softened to a gentle murmur, the sun dipping low, spilling gold across the fields. I held her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against mine. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Her hands rested on my chest, fingers tracing the scars I had long tried to hide. And I realized something that had eluded me for too long. Love does not demand perfection. It only asks courage, honesty, and presence. We stayed like that for a long moment, the world shrinking to the warmth between us, the wind carrying the scent of pine and river, the distant call of birds settling into the evening. "I was afraid," I whispered finally, and she tilted her head, waiting patiently. "I know," she said, "but fear does not define you. Love does." The truth in her words struck me. All the years I had spent building walls, all the nights of quiet worry and caution, had taught me something essential. The heart is resilient, and it grows stronger when shared, even with the weight of past pain. We walked back toward the house, hands intertwined, steps slow, deliberate, as if each movement was a vow. I glanced at my son, asleep in the doorway, and understood that love is not just about desire. It is about care, protection, patience, and courage. That evening, under the soft glow of lantern light, I held her hand, and we laughed quietly, sharing small stories, small comforts, realizing that life's beauty lies in connection, in giving and receiving trust, tenderness, and hope. And in that moment, I understood the moral that life had quietly whispered all along. The heart that has known pain is not broken, it is ready. The heart that has feared loss is not weak, it is wise. And the heart that dares to love again, even after years of silence, teaches us all the power of courage, compassion, and resilience. Love is not found by hiding, but by stepping forward, hands open, heart unguarded, ready to share both joy and sorrow, and in doing so, discovering the truest strength a human being can possess.